Marcus Delacroix folded his hands and leaned forward. Let's get one thing clear. This community has been here for nearly 20 years, 300 families, and now you show up, claiming you own the land under all of it, based on some ancient deed and a lease nobody's ever heard of. Like the conversation was over. Like 2 decades of houses and title insurance could erase what the county recorder had never stopped showing. What he didn't know was that the annual lease payments had stopped in 2009. This wasn't a boundary dispute or paperwork mix-up. 1,500 acres, 312 homes, clubhouse, pool, tennis courts. A subdivision built on a ground lease that expired 3 years ago. It hadn't been paid for 15. Marcus made the mistake every HOA president makes, assuming that because something had been a certain way for years, the land underneath must belong to them. It endured over 8 months. I watched the Ridgecrest Estates Homeowners Association discover what happens when you build a neighborhood on someone else's land and the real owner shows up with a deed. It's a survey and no interest. In pretending the fiction was real, this is the story of how an HOA built on an expired lease became a community of tenants. Not because I wanted to take their homes, because property law doesn't care who you think you are. It cares whose name is on the deed. But let me start from the beginning. Before we dive into, I'd love to know where you're listening from today. And don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons for more interesting stories just like this. That the call came on a Tuesday morning in late August from an attorney I'd never heard of, informing me that my uncle, my mother's older brother, a man I'd met maybe 5 times in my life, had passed away 3 weeks earlier and named me as the sole beneficiary of his estate. What estate, I asked, genuinely confused. It's my Uncle Richard. Talmage had been a quiet, reclusive man who'd lived alone in a small town for hours north of me. As far as I knew, he had nothing, no wife, no kids, no career to speak of. Just a modest life that had ended quietly in a rural hospital. Primarily land, the attorney said. Approximately 1,500 acres in Cascade County. It's been the family since the 1940s. Your uncle inherited it from your grandfather, and now it passes to you. I sat down. It's 1,500 acres. Yes, undeveloped mostly. Timber, scrub, some meadowland. The property taxes are current. There's no mortgage. It's yours, free and clear. I thanked him, hung up, and stared at my kitchen wall, trying to process what I'd just been told. 1,500 acres. I'd grown up hearing vague stories about the old Talmage land up north, some sprawling tract. My grandfather had bought after the war for almost nothing because nobody else wanted it. Steep hills, dense forest, no road access, no value. My mother had mentioned it once or twice, usually in the context of your uncle's hermit property, but I'd never seen it, never thought about it, certainly never imagined I'd inherit it. Now it was mine. I drove up 2 weekends later to meet with the attorney, a man named Gordon Hillman in his 70s, who'd handled my uncle's affairs for decades. His office was in a converted house on the main street of a town so small it didn't have a stoplight. Gordon handed me a thick folder across a desk cluttered with files and coffee-stained maps. Everything's in here. The deed, tax records, survey, maps from the 60s, and your uncle's will. Straightforward. No debts, no disputes. The land is yours. I opened the folder and pulled out the deed. It was old, creased, and recorded in 1948. Showing my grandfather as grantee for 1,487 acres of timberland and unimproved meadow in Cascade County. Beneath it was a more recent document, my uncle's estate transfer, dated 3 weeks ago, conveying the same parcel to me. What's it worth? I asked. Gordon shrugged. Hard to say. Timberland values vary. If you wanted to sell it as is, maybe a few $100,000. If you could get utilities in and subdivide, maybe more, but it's remote. Steep in places. Your uncle never did anything with it, just paid the taxes and left it alone. Why'd he leave it to me? He didn't have anyone else, Gordon said simply. And he told me once that you were the smart one in the family. Figured you'd know what to do with it. I didn't feel smart. I felt confused. But I thanked Gordon, took the folder, and drove toward the property to see what I'd inherited. The address on the tax records led me to a gravel road that wound up into the hills, east of town. The land wasn't marked no gate, No sign, just dense forest on both sides, and the occasional clearing where you could see ridgelines stretching into the distance. I stopped at a pullout and checked the county's GIS app on my phone, zooming in on the parcel boundaries. The shape was irregular, sprawling across ridges and valleys, the northern edge running along a creek and the southern boundary following an old logging road. It was massive. I zoomed out, trying to get a sense of scale, and that's when I noticed something strange. There was a subdivision, a big one. Neat rows of streets and cul-de-sacs, hundreds of parcels, all labeled Ridgecrest Estates, HOA. And it sat almost entirely within the boundaries of my inherited tract. I stared at my phone, zooming in and out, checking the parcel lines over and over. The subdivision wasn't adjacent to my land. It wasn't bordering it. It was on it. I pulled up the property details for one of the Ridgecrest lots. The owner was listed as an individual, John and Susan Meyer, but the legal description referenced Lot 14. Block 3, Ridgecrest Estates, Phase 2. I checked the deed history. The Meyers had purchased the lot in 2018 from a developer called Summit Ridge Development LLC. Before that, the chain went back to nothing. No conveyance from my uncle. No deed from the Talmadge estate. Just a plat filed in 2005 that carved the land into lots and streets as if it had always belonged to the developer. I sat in my truck, engine idling, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Either the GIS map was wrong, or there was a neighborhood of hundreds of homes sitting on land that on paper still belonged to me. I drove into Ridgecrest Estates that afternoon. The entrance was marked by a stone monument with elegant lettering, Ridgecrest Estates, a private gated community. Beyond it, a wrought-iron gate stood open, flanked by brick pillars and manicured landscaping. I drove through slowly, taking in the neighborhood. It was upscaled large homes on big lots, two-car garages, professionally maintained yards. Streets were wide and smooth, lined with young trees and decorative streetlights. There was a clubhouse near the entrance, a community pool, tennis courts, and walking trails that wound up into the hills. Signs everywhere. Private HOA property, no trespassing. Residents and guests only. Speed limit 25, strictly enforced. I passed a man mowing his lawn and a couple walking a dog. They waved. I waved back, feeling like an intruder even though, according to the deed in my folder, I owned the dirt their houses were sitting on. At the back of the subdivision I found newer construction Phase 3, according to a sign with homes still under framing and lots marked coming soon. A banner stretched across the sales office. Own your dream home at Ridgecrest. Limited lots remaining. I parked near the sales office and walked up to the entrance. A woman in her 40s greeted me with a professional smile. Welcome to Ridgecrest. Are you looking to buy? Just curious, I said. How long has this community been here? Phase 1 started in 2005, she said proudly. We're finishing Phase 3 now. Over 300 homes with another 100 planned. It's one of the most desirable communities in Cascade County. Who owns the land? I asked. She blinked, slightly confused by the question. It's the homeowner's own. There are lots. HOA owns the common areas, the clubhouse, trails, amenities. Why do you ask? Just curious, I said again. Thanking her and walking back to my truck, I spent the rest of the weekend at the county recorder's office, pulling every document I could find related to Ridgecrest Estates and the Talmadge property. What I found, or more importantly, didn't find was stunning. There was no deed transferring the land from my uncle or grandfather to Summit Ridge Development. No sale. No conveyance. Nothing. There was a recorded plat from 2005, showing the subdivision layout, streets and lot lines. But plats don't transfer ownership. They just show how land is divided. Whoever filed that plat had carved up property they didn't own and started selling lots as if they did. Found a handful of references to a development rights and ground lease agreement dated 1998, supposedly between my grandfather and an entity called Ridgecrest Land Holdings. But when I requested a copy, the clerk came back empty-handed. It's referenced in the plat, she said, but the actual lease document isn't recorded here. Might be in a private file somewhere. I pulled the corporate records for Ridgecrest Land Holdings and Summit Ridge Development. Both were dissolved years ago, one in 2010, the other in 2017. No assets, no contact information, just dead entities that had once claimed to hold rights they might never have had. The deeper I dug, the clearer it became. Someone had built an entire subdivision, 300 homes, and counting in land they didn't own, using a development agreement, may have expired or never been valid in the first place, and now that land was mine. I called Gordon Hillman from my hotel room that night. Did my uncle ever lease or sell part of the property to a developer? There was a pause. Not that I'm aware of. He never mentioned anything like that. There's a subdivision on the land, I said. Ridgecrest Estates, hundreds of homes. They've been there since 2005. Gordon was quiet for a long moment. I knew there was a neighborhood nearby, but I didn't realize it was on Richard's land. You sure? I checked the GIS and the deeds. The entire subdivision sits inside the boundaries of the Talmadge tract, and I can't find any recorded document transferring ownership. Then they're trespassing, Gordon said slowly. Or they're relying on some kind of lease or agreement that's not properly recorded. Either way, you need a real property attorney. This is beyond estate work. Can you recommend someone? Try Evelyn Marsh in the city. She handles complex title disputes. Tell her I sent you. I thanked him and hung up, staring at the maps and documents spread across the hotel. Bed. 1,500 acres, 300 homes, and not one deed showing the land had ever left the Talmadge family. I'd inherited more than timber and scrub. I'd inherited an entire neighborhood that didn't know it was squatting on my land, and judging by the private HOA property signs and the confident smiles of the people living there, they had no idea their whole world was built on a foundation that didn't exist. I folded the maps, packed the documents, and drove home, already knowing what came next. Because when you inherit land, you inherit everything on it. And if what's on, it doesn't belong there, you get to decide what happens next. The people of Ridgecrest Estates were about to find out. I wasn't the kind of heir who played nice. Evelyn Marsh's office was in a renovated brick building downtown, 3 floors up. With floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river, she was in her late 50s, sharp-eyed and direct. The kind of attorney who'd spent decades untangling property messes and had seen every variation of greed, incompetence, and fraud. I laid out everything on her conference table: the inheritance, documents, the GIS maps, the subdivision plat, the corporate records for the dissolved developer entities, and printouts showing 0 recorded deed transferring my land to anyone. Evelyn reviewed it methodically, making notes on a yellow legal pad, occasionally pulling up county records on her laptop to cross-reference what I'd found. After 40 minutes, she set down her pen and looked at me. This is a mess, but it's a mess that works in your favor. How so? Because the developer built a subdivision on land they either never owned or lost the right to occupy years ago. And now you're the record owner. That means every house, every street, every common area in Ridgecrest Estates is sitting on property that belongs to you, not them. How did they get away with it? I asked. Evelyn leaned back in her chair. Let me dig deeper, and I'll tell you, but my guess? Somebody signed a lease or development agreement decades ago. Things went sideways, and instead of fixing it properly, the developer just kept building, filed plats, sold lots, and hoped nobody would ever check the underlying title. Can we find the original agreement? I asked. We can try. If it exists, it's either recorded somewhere obscure, or it's sitting in a file box in a dead attorney's storage unit. Either way, I'll track it down. Evelyn hired a title researcher, a woman named Claudia, who specialized in digging through old records that most people didn't know existed. Claudia spent 2 weeks in county archives, old law firm files, and storage. Facilities where defunct developers had dumped their paperwork when they dissolved. She found it in a box. Marked Ridgecrest, MISC, 1990s. In a warehouse owned by a title company that had gone out of business in 2012, the document was labeled Development Rights and Ground Lease Agreement, Talmadge Property. It was dated June 15, 1998, and signed by my grandfather, Arthur Talmadge, as lessor, and an entity called Ridgecrest Land Holdings, LLC, as Leslie. Evelyn and I read it together in her office. Claudia's scanned copy glowing on the laptop screen. The key terms. Term. 25 years, ending June 15, 2023. Purpose. Leslie granted exclusive rights to develop residential subdivision on approximately 400 acres of the Talmadge property, subject to county approval and compliance with all terms. Payment, $50,000 upfront paid, plus annual ground rent of $25,000. Due January 1st each year? Reversion clause? If Leslie failed to make any annual payment? Or if development ceased for more than 2 consecutive years? All rights reverted immediately to lessor, and any improvements became property of lessor without compensation, no fee transfer. Leslie acknowledged it, held no ownership interest in the land. Only a leasehold development, right? All underlying fee simple title remained with Talmadge. Evelyn highlighted the reversion clause and the expiration date. This lease ended in June 2023, 14 months ago. And even if it hadn't, there's this. She pulled up a spreadsheet Claudia had compiled, showing payment records from my uncle's old bank account, the annual $25,000. Payments had come in regularly from 1998 through 2009. Then they stopped. No payment in 2010, Evelyn said, or any year after, which means the reversion clause kicked in 15 years ago. Every structure built after that point, probably half the subdivision, was built on land your uncle already owned outright, with no lease in effect. Did he know? I asked. Hard to say. He kept paying property taxes, so he knew he still owned the land. But he was elderly, reclusive, and may not have realized the developer was still building without paying. Or maybe he didn't care. Either way, the law doesn't require him to enforce the reversion immediately. The clause is automatic. The moment they stopped paying, the lease died, and the rights came back to him. And now to me, I said. And now to you. We pulled every deed recorded for individual lots in Ridgecrest Estates, starting with Phase 1 in 2005 and running through Phase 3 in 2024. What we found was a patchwork of incomplete and misleading conveyances. Phase 1 2005 to 2008. The early lot deeds referenced the ground lease explicitly, stating that each lot was subject to the development rights and ground lease agreement dated June 15, 1998, recorded in Book 1847. It's page 203. Except the lease wasn't recorded in Book 1847. It's page 203. That page was blank. The lease had never been properly recorded at all, just referenced as if it had been. Phase 2, 2009 to 2015. The deeds stopped mentioning the lease entirely. They were written as if the developer owned the land in fee simple and was selling it outright, but there was no deed to the developer showing they'd ever acquired fee ownership. They were selling land they didn't own, using language that implied they did. Phase 3, 2016 present. Same problem. Clean-looking deeds, professional language, title insurance issued, but the chain of title was broken. Every deed traced back to Summit Ridge Development, which had acquired the land from ... nobody. There was no recorded conveyance from the Talmadge estate, just a void in the record where a transfer should have been. They filed plats and started selling, Evelyn said, and everyone downstream, buyers, lenders. Title companies assumed the developer had valid title because the documents looked legitimate. But if you trace it all the way back, there's no, they're there. The developer never owned this land. They had a lease, and they lost it. What about adverse possession? I asked. They've been here almost 20 years. Evelyn shook her head. Adverse possession requires hostile, open, and continuous use without the owner's permission. But here, the original use was under a lease with permission. Once the lease terminated, they became holdover tenants, not adverse possessors. And your uncle kept paying property taxes the whole time, which shows he never abandoned the land. No adverse possession claim is going to work. Evelyn ordered a full boundary survey, hiring a firm that specialized in large rural tracts. The surveyor, a man named Ben Corliss, spent 3 weeks walking the property, locating old survey monuments, and using GPS to map the exact boundaries of the Talmadge tract. When he finished, He overlaid his survey on top of the Ridgecrest Estates. Pled. The result was undeniable. The entire subdivision, all 3 phases, 312 homes, plus the clubhouse, pool, tennis courts, walking trails, and common areas sat wholly within the boundaries of my inherited land. Not partially, not mostly, wholly. Ben's report was clear. The Ridgecrest Estate subdivision, as platted and constructed, occupies approximately 487 acres of the Talmadge property. No portion of the subdivision extends beyond the recorded Talmadge boundary. All structures, improvements, and infrastructure are located on land titled to the Talmadge estate. Evelyn attached Ben's survey to a formal title opinion she'd drafted, and we sat in her office reviewing the final summary. Title opinion: Talmadge property / Ridgecrest Estates, the Talmadge property, consisting of approximately 1,487 acres, has been continuously owned by the Talmadge family since 1948. With no recorded simple conveyance to any third party, a ground lease executed in 1998 granted limited development rights to Ridgecrest Land Holdings, LLC, for a term ending June 15, 2023. Annual payments ceased in 2009, triggering an automatic reversion clause. Since 2009, no valid lease or development agreement has been in effect. Any construction or occupation occurring after that date is without legal authority. The subdivision plats filed for Ridgecrest Estates do not constitute a transfer of ownership. Plats subdivide land. They do not convey title. Individual lot deeds, sold by the developer, purport to transfer for simple ownership, but the developer held no such title to convey. These deeds are void or voidable as to the land itself. As the current simple owner of the Talmadge property, my name holds legal title to all land within the subdivision, including parcels described as privately owned lots and areas designated as HOA common property. Conclusion: the Ridgecrest Estate subdivision is built on land owned by my name. The homeowners and HOA have no recorded ownership interest in the underlying land. Their occupation is at sufferance, and my name retains all rights to exclude, lease, or otherwise control. The property. Evelyn closed the file and looked at me. Do you understand what this means? I think so. You don't just own 1,500 acres of empty land, she said. You own the dirt under every one of their houses, every street, every private HOA amenity. All of it, they think they own. Their lots. They don't. They're living on your land, paying property taxes on parcels they don't legally hold, under deeds that never validly transferred title. So what do? I asked. Evelyn smiled, but it wasn't warm. That depends on how nice you want to be. You could offer them a path to legitimize their ownership leases, lot purchases, whatever. You could play hardball and remind them that when you build on someone else's land without permission, you're just a squatter with a mortgage. I thought about the signs at the entrance: private HOA property, the sales office promising own your dream home, the confident wave from the guy mowing his lawn on land he didn't own. I'm not interested in being nice, I said. Evelyn nodded. Then let's make sure they understand exactly who owns what, and what happens when you don't. She pulled out a blank recording form. First step, we record a notice of interest and claim against every parcel in Ridgecrest Estates. It won't stop them from living there, but it'll freeze every sale, every refinance, and every title insurance policy until this is resolved. Do it, I said. Evelyn started typing, and somewhere in Ridgecrest Estates, 300 families were about to learn that the land their home sat on had never been theirs, and the person who actually owned it had just shown up with a deed. A survey, and absolutely no interest in playing nice. The notice of claim was recorded on a Friday afternoon, a single document, cross-referenced against every parcel in Ridgecrest Estates, notifying anyone searching title that the underlying land was subject to a dispute, and that I, as heir to the Talmadge estate, claimed superior ownership. It was polite, professional, and it turned every property in Ridgecrest into a title nightmare. By Monday morning, the HOA president had left. Me 3 voicemails, each one progressively angrier. By Tuesday, their attorney, a man named Craig Whitmore, from a firm that specialized in HOA law, sent a cease and desist letter demanding I immediately withdraw the fraudulent claim and threatening litigation for slander of title. Evelyn responded with a single-line email, "My client is the record owner. If your clients dispute that, they're welcome to present their deed. We'll wait." Wednesday afternoon, I received a terse invitation to meet with the Ridgecrest Estates Board of Directors and their legal counsel. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening at the clubhouse. Evelyn and I arrived 10 minutes early, carrying 2 bankers' boxes full of documents. The clubhouse conference room was exactly what I expected. Vaulted ceilings, leather chairs, a long polished table, and walls decorated with framed photos of ribbon cuttings and community events. The HOA board was already seated 5 people, ranging from their 40s to their 60s, all dressed business casual and radiating the kind of confidence that comes from years of unchallenged authority. At the head of the table sat Marcus Delacroix, the HOA president. Mid-50s, silver hair, expensive watch, the posture of someone used to being the most important person in any room. Next to him was Craig Whitmore, their attorney, flanked by the rest of the board, a treasurer, a secretary, and 2 at-large members whose names I didn't catch. Marcus didn't stand when we entered. He gestured to the chairs at the opposite end of the table. "Please sit." Evelyn and I sat. I set the boxes on the floor beside me, but didn't open them yet. Marcus folded his hands and leaned forward slightly. "Let's get one thing clear from the start. This community has been here for nearly 20 years. 300 families. We've built something valuable here, Holmes. Relationships, a way of life. And now you show up, claiming you own the land under all of it, based on some ancient deed and a lease nobody's ever heard of." "It's not ancient," I said calmly. "It's recorded, continuously. Since 1948 we have title insurance," Marcus said, his tone dismissive. "Every homeowner here does. If there was a problem with the title, the insurance companies would have caught it." Evelyn pulled a folder from one of the boxes and slid it across the table. "Title insurance protects buyers from defects that existed before they purchased, doesn't create ownership where none exists, and it doesn't cover situations where the seller never had valid title to convey in the first place." Craig picked up the folder and flipped through it copies of the 1998 lease. The payment records showing the lease had been abandoned in 2009, and the survey showing the entire subdivision within my property boundaries. "This is a lease from 1998, Craig said. "It expired." "Leases expire all the time. That doesn't mean the land reverts." "It does when the lease includes a reversion clause," Evelyn replied. "Which this one does. Page 4, paragraph 9. If the lessee fails to make annual payments, all rights revert to the lessor, and any improvements become property of the lessor. The developer stopped paying in 2009. The lease terminated automatically. Everything built after that point was built without authority." Marcus waved a hand dismissively. "That's a technicality. We've been here for years. We've maintained this land, improved it, paid taxes on it. We have color of title, own it through adverse possession." Evelyn didn't blink. "Adverse possession requires hostile use without the owner's permission. Your occupation started under a lease with permission. When the lease ended, you became holdover tenants, not adverse possessors. And my client's uncle continued paying property taxes on the entire tract through his death last year, which demonstrates continuous ownership and defeats any adverse possession claim." "This is ridiculous," one of the board members, a woman in her 60s, said, her voice shaking slightly. "You're trying to take people's homes? Hardworking families who bought these properties in good faith?" "I'm not trying to take anyone's home," I said, keeping my voice even. "I'm trying to resolve a situation where an entire subdivision was built on land that was never properly transferred. Your developer either lied to you or was incompetent, or both. But that's not my problem. The land is mine. It's been mine since my uncle died, and I'm offering you a way to fix this without going to court." Marcus leaned back, his expression hardening. "And what's your offer?" I pulled a single-page summary from my folder and slid it across. "It's simple, you acknowledge, that I hold title to the land. Then, every homeowner gets a choice. Sign a long-term ground lease at a reasonable rates. $300 a month for 99 years, or purchase their lot outright at fair market value, which will appraise independently. You want us to pay you? Marcus said, his voice rising. For land we already own. You don't own it, Evelyn said flatly. You never did. Your developer sold you deeds to land they didn't own. You can either fix that now on reasonable terms, or we'll quiet title in court, and the result will be the same, except you'll also owe legal fees. Craig leaned forward. This is extortion. It's property law, Evelyn replied. My client owns the land. He's offering a structured path to let your members legitimize their ownership or lease their parcels long term. If you'd prefer to argue this in front of a judge, we're happy to do that. But I'll tell you right now, you're going to lose. Marcus stood abruptly. We're not agreeing to anything. We're going to fight this. We have resources. We have 300 families who will stand together. You're not going to bully us off our land. It's not your land, I said quietly. It's mine. The meeting ended 10 minutes later with nothing resolved. Craig said they'd consult further with counsel and explore all legal options. Marcus walked out without shaking hands, and the rest of the board followed. Murmuring anxiously among themselves, Evelyn and I packed up the boxes and left. That went about as well as I expected, she said in the parking lot. They're not going to settle, I said. No, they're going to fight, which means we escalate. The email went out from the HOA board that night, sent to every homeowner in Ridgecrest Estates. Someone forwarded it to me within an hour. Subject: Urgent, protecting our community, Ear Ridgecrest residents. You may have heard rumors about a so-called title dispute affecting our community. We want to address this directly and assure you that your homes are safe and your ownership is secure. A person claiming to be the heir to old farmland has filed a baseless claim against our neighborhood, alleging that he owns the land under your homes. This is false. This individual is a vulture heir, someone who inherited property he never cared about and is now trying to extort money from hard-working families. We have consulted with legal counsel, and we are prepared to fight this aggressively. We have title insurance. We have decades of established ownership. We have the law on our side. Do not communicate with this individual or his attorney. Do not sign any documents he sends you. Do not negotiate individually. We will defend this community at all costs. Stand with us, and we will prevail. Marcus Delacroix, President Ridgecrest. Estates H.O. Evelyn read it and laughed, not a happy laugh, but the kind that comes from seeing someone dig their own grave. He just called you a vulture heir and accused you of extortion, she said. In writing, 300 people. Does that help us? I asked. It helps when we sue him personally for defamation. But more importantly, it shows he's not interested in resolving this, which means we stop being nice. What's the next move? Evelyn pulled up a blank recording form on her laptop. We file a list pendants against every parcel in Ridgecrest Estates. It's a formal notice that there's pending litigation affecting the title. Once it's recorded, no bank will approve a mortgage, no buyer will close a sale, and no title company will issue insurance. Their property values don't just drop, they freeze. Do it, I said. The list pendants was recorded Monday morning. By Monday afternoon, the first panicked calls started coming in, not to me, but to real estate agents, lenders, and title companies. A homeowner trying to sell her house got a call from her buyer's attorney. We found a notice of pending litigation on the title, "We can't close until it's resolved." A couple trying to refinance their mortgage was told by their bank, "There's a cloud on your title. We're denying the application." A man trying to take out a home equity loan called his title company and was told, "We can't insure this property while there's an active dispute over ownership." By Tuesday, the HOA's phone lines were flooded. By Wednesday, an emergency board meeting was called. And by Thursday, Marcus was leaving me voicemails again, this time. Not angry, but desperate. We need to talk. This is hurting innocent people. We need to work something out. I didn't call him back, because the people in Ridgecrest Estates needed to understand something fundamental. They'd been sold a lie. They'd been living on land they didn't own, under deeds that didn't convey what they promised, protected by title insurance that couldn't fix, The fact that the person who sold them their homes never had the right to do so, and now. The real owner had shown up, not with threats, not with bulldozers, just with a deed, a survey, and a recorded notice that said, in the cold language of property law, this land is in dispute, and until it's resolved, nothing moves. Marcus called it extortion. I called it the truth. And the truth, as it turned out, was worth more than 300 mortgages. 300 deeds and 20 years of confidence built on sand. Because when you don't own the dirt under your house, you don't own your house, you're just renting. And the landlord had finally shown up to collect. The list pendants detonated. It's like a financial bomb across Ridgecrest Estates. Within 72 hours of recording, the carefully constructed fiction that everyone owned their homes began to collapse under the weight of something nobody could ignore. Documentation. A retired couple trying to downsize had their sale fall through when the buyer's title company found the notice and refused to proceed. We can't insure a property with a recorded claim against it, the title officer explained. It's not until the dispute is resolved or a court rules. A young family attempting to refinance trying to lower their monthly payment by $300 received a terse letter from their lender. Due to a cloud on title discovered during our search, we are unable to complete your refinance application. Please resolve the title defect and reapply. A man trying to take out a home equity loan to pay for his daughter's college was denied outright. His loan officer didn't sugarcoat it. There's a guy claiming he owns the land your house sits on. Till that's cleared up, your equity is worth nothing to us. Real estate agents started quietly pulling listings. Appraisers began adding disclaimers to their reports. And the Facebook group for Ridgecrest residents, normally full of yard sale announcements and babysitter recommendations, turned into a war zone of panic, blame, and frantic questions nobody could answer. The emergency HOA meeting was held on a Tuesday night, packed wall-to-wall with angry, terrified homeowners. I didn't attend. Someone recorded it and sent me the audio the next day. Marcus tried to maintain control from the front of the room, but the crowd wasn't having it. He told us this was handled. A woman shouted. You said we had nothing to worry about? Now I can't sell my house? We're working with our attorney, Marcus said, his voice strained. This is a legal process. These things take time. How long? Amon yelled. Because my refinance just got denied and my rate adjusts in 3 months. I'm going to lose an extra $500 a month because of this. Why didn't anyone check the title before we bought? Another voice demanded. How does an entire neighborhood get built on land nobody owns? Marcus didn't have an answer for that. Craig Whitmore, the HOA attorney, tried to step in. The developer provided us with assurances that title was clear. We relied on those representations in good faith. If there's fraud here, it's on the developer, not the HOA. Then sue the developer, someone shouted. The developer's been dissolved for years, Craig said. The entities that built this place don't exist anymore. The room erupted. People shouting over each other, demanding answers, threatening lawsuits against the HOA, against Marcus personally, against anyone they could blame for the nightmare. They'd just woken up too. And in the middle of it all, a woman's voice cut through, calm, clear, and authoritative. I want to see the original development agreements. The room quieted slightly. I recognized the voice from the recording older, measured with the cadence of someone used to being listened to. Marcus frowned. Who are you? It's Diane Porter. I'm a retired prosecutor. I bought here in Phase 2, 2011. And if what this man is saying is truth, that the developer never owned the land than somebody knew, developers don't just forget to buy property. Either they had a lease and it expired, or they forged documents. Or they committed fraud. So I want to see the original agreements. Every board meeting minute. Every communication with the developer. Because if this HOA leadership knew there was a problem and covered it up, that's criminal. Marcus went pale. Diane didn't wait for permission. Under state HOA law, any member could request access to corporate records, and the board had 7 days to comply. She filed a formal request the next morning, demanding all development agreements between the Talmadge, state, in any developer entity, all board meeting minutes from 2005 to present, all emails, memos, or correspondence referencing title, ownership, or the lease arrangement, all legal opinions obtained by the board regarding the land title. Marcus tried to stall, claiming attorney-client privilege and irrelevance, but Diane wasn't a retired prosecutor for nothing. She filed a complaint with the state HOA Oversight Board, threatening to sue for access, and within 10 days, the documents started arriving. What she found was damning. The first smoking gun was a memo dated March 2008 from the original developers, attorney to the first HOA board president, Re. Ground lease status: the Talmadge ground lease expires in 2023. After that, all development rights revert unless we negotiate an extension or purchase the land outright. I recommend we approach Talmadge in 2022, discuss a buyout or renewal. In the meantime, continue development as planned, but be aware that simple title has not transferred. Lot buyers are purchasing structures and leasehold interests. It's not the underlying land. The board president's handwritten note in the margin. Don't tell buyers. Mark it as fee simple. We'll deal with Talmadge later. Diane forwarded that to Evelyn, along with a second document and email chain from 2010. After the lease payments had stopped, from a rude treasurer 2010-2, board president subject, lease. Payment I noticed we haven't made the annual ground rent payment to Talmadge. The lease requires $25,000 a year.
How?
Are we still obligated? Response from board president. Developer says Talmadge is old and not paying attention. If we just stop paying and keep building, we can claim adverse possession in 10 to 15 years. Cheaper than buying the land outright. Don't bring this up at meetings. Diane compiled everything into a binder and hand-delivered it to Evelyn's office. They knew, she said, her voice tight with anger. The board knew the lease was expiring. They knew payments stopped. And they deliberately hid it from homeowners, hoping the old man would die and nobody would ever check. Evelyn read through the documents, her expression darkening with each page. This is conspiracy to defraud, possibly criminal. Definitely grounds for a lawsuit against the board. Right about the homeowners, Diane asked. Most of us had no idea. The homeowners are victims, Evelyn said, but they're still living on. Land they don't own. The question is whether they're willing to work with my client to fix that, or whether they're going to keep listening to Marcus and fight a battle. They can't win. The title insurance companies moved next. 3 of the largest insurers that had issued policies in Ridgecrest, Cascade Title, Pioneer Insurance, and First Ham Title began sending reservation of rights letters to homeowners, essentially saying, "We're investigating whether your title claim is covered under your policy. If we determine that the developer misrepresented ownership or that the defect existed before you purchased, coverage may be denied." Translation: you're on your own. One insurer went further, filing a lawsuit against the dissolved developer entities, the original board members, and even Marcus personally, alleging fraud, negligent misrepresentation, and breach of duty. They did it. We're trying to recover the millions they'd paid out in premiums on policies that were now worthless. The message was clear. The title companies weren't going to bail anyone out. If the land had never been properly conveyed, the policies didn't create ownership, they just provided a false sense of security. The state got involved in October. A deputy attorney general named Laura Chen opened an investigation into fraudulent subdivision plats and misrepresentation in public offering statements. She subpoenaed records from the county, the HOA, every title company that had issued policies in Ridgecrest. Evelyn got a call from her office asking if I'd cooperate as a witness. I agreed. Laura's focus was narrow, but brutal. Had anyone knowingly filed plats or sold lots based on land they didn't own? The answer, based on the documents Diane had uncovered, was yes. The original developer's attorney was deposed. He confirmed he'd advised the developer in 2008 that the lease would expire, and that simple title hadn't transferred. He also confirmed that the developer had chosen to continue selling lots as if they owned the land outright, without disclosing the lease situation to buyers. Did you advise them that was illegal? Laura asked. I advised them it was risky. Did they do it anyway? Yes. 2 former board members were questioned under oath. Both admitted they'd known about the lease and the stopped payments, and both claimed they'd been told by the developer that it would be fine and that Talmadge would never check. By November, the state had enough to refer the case for criminal review. Charges weren't filed immediately, but the threat hung over everyone involved. Evelyn and I met in her office on a gray afternoon in late November. She'd laid out 3 options on her conference table, each one more aggressive than the last. Option 1, she said. We file a quiet title action and ask the court to declare you the sole fee-simple owner of all the land. The homeowner's deeds are voided or subordinated. You win, they lose, and then you decide what to do with 300 families living on your property. How long does that take? I asked. A year, maybe 18 months. But you'll win. The evidence is overwhelming. Option 2, we file eviction actions. Mass unlawful detainer suits against everyone living on your land without a lease. It's the nuclear option. The court orders them out, and you take possession of the land and everything on it. That's brutal, I said. It is, but it's legal. There. Occupying your property without permission. In option 3, Evelyn leaned back. We offer a global settlement, but not the nice version you offered before. You've been more than patient. Now we set the terms, and they take it or leave it. You're not negotiating anymore. You're dictating. I looked at the stack of documents, the fraudulent plats, the stopped payments, the board emails admitting they'd gambled and lost. What would that look like, I asked. You offer 2 paths, Evelyn said. Homeowners can lease their lots from you at rates you set, adjusted annually with you holding reversionary rights. Or they can purchase their lots outright, but at appraisal rates that reflect the clouded title probably 20 to 30% below market. The HOA as an entity surrenders any claim to common areas and acknowledges you as landowner. Anyone who refuses gets sued individually. And if they still fight, then we file everything. Quiet title, evictions, fraud claims. We bankrupt the HOA, void their deeds, and you end up owning an entire neighborhood. I sat with that for a long time, staring out the window at the city. Below, I'd never wanted to own a neighborhood. I'd inherited land that should have been mine all along, and found 300. People living on it under a lie. They weren't evil. Most of them had been lied to, sold homes they thought they owned, living lives built on paperwork that turned out to be fiction. But that didn't change the fact that it was my land, my deed, my inheritance, and I wasn't playing nice anymore. The settlement, I said. Non-negotiable terms. 30 days to accept. After that, we file everything. Evelyn nodded and started typing, somewhere in Ridgecrest Estates. 300 families were about to learn what happens when you build your life on land you don't own, and the person who does own it stops pretending to be reasonable. The settlement. Proposal was 23 pages long, dense with legal language, but clear in its intent. Evelyn drafted it over Thanksgiving weekend and sent it by certified mail to every homeowner in Ridgecrest Estates on December 1st, along with a cover letter that was for her almost merciful .2. Ridgecrest Estates homeowners, IRE, final settlement. Offer Talmadge property title resolution, as you are aware. The land underlying your home is owned by my client, my name, as heir to the Talmadge estate. Despite prior attempts to resolve this matter amicably, the HOA board has chosen litigation over negotiation, and the result has been financial harm to innocent homeowners. My client is offering one final opportunity to resolve your individual title issues. This offer is non-negotiable and expires in 30 days. After that, litigation will proceed, and these terms will no longer be available. The proposal itself was stark. Option 1. Ground lease, sign a 99-year ground lease for your lot. Initial. Rent, $400 a month. It's escalating 3% annually. Lease grants you exclusive use of the lot and the right to maintain. Improve or sell your structure house. At lease end or upon default. All improvements revert to the landowner. Lease is recordable, insurable, and allows you to refinance or sell your home with clear disclosure to buyers. Option 2, structure sale. And leaseback sell your house structure, not the land to my client at appraised fair market value. minus a 25% discount to account for clouded title and market conditions. Enter a long-term residential lease 30 years, renewable at below market. Rent, you remain in your home as a tenant. My client assumes ownership and responsibility for the structure. You are released from mortgage obligations on the structure, subject to lender agreements. Option 3. Vacate, voluntarily surrender possession of the property. My client will compensate you for documented moving expenses up to $10,000 and release any claims for past occupancy. Failure to choose. Homeowners who do not respond within 30 days will be named as defendants in a quiet title action seeking a declaration that they hold no ownership interest in the land or improvements therein. The letter concluded with a line that Evelyn knew would sting. This is not a negotiation. This is a resolution. The land is mine. The only question is whether you want to stay on it under clear terms or fight a battle you cannot win. Marcus Delacroix lost his mind. An emergency email went out to the entire community within hours of the letters arriving. Subject: do not sign hostile takeover ADTMP if so-called settlement is a hostile takeover of our community. It demands you surrender ownership of your homes and pay rent to a stranger who contributed nothing to building this neighborhood. The HOA board is filing a lawsuit to protect your rights. We are pursuing adverse possession claims, challenging the validity of his supposed deed and exploring every legal avenue to defend our community. Do not negotiate individually. Do not sign his documents. Do not give in to intimidation. We will prevail only if we stand together. Marcus Delacroix. The next night, he held a town hall at the clubhouse. Standing room only. He brought Craig Whitmore, their attorney, who laid out a plan that sounded confident but felt desperate. We're filing a class action lawsuit, Craig said. We'll argue adverse possession, equitable estoppel, and a dozen other defenses. We'll tie this up for years. And in the meantime, you keep living in your homes. What about refinancing? Someone shouted from the back. My rate adjusts in 6 months. We're working on that. What about selling? I got a job transfer. I can't move if I can't sell. Craig hesitated. The list pendants complicate sales. But once we win in court, what if we lose? A woman interrupted. What happens then? Craig didn't answer. Marcus took the microphone. We're not going to lose. This is our community. We've built it, maintained it, lived in it. The law protects people like us. But Diane Porter stood up in the third row, her voice cutting through the noise. The law protects whoever actually owns the land, she said. And we don't. I've seen the documents. The lease expired. The payments stopped. The board knew and covered it up. If we keep fighting, we're just wasting money and time. Some of you need to sell. Some of you need to refinance. You can't do either while this is unresolved. His offer isn't generous, but it's real. And it's more than we're going to get in court. Marcus glared at her. You're helping him. I'm helping the people in this room, Diane said. Gez, unlike you, I'm not pretending we have a case we don't. She walked out. 10 people followed her. The first call to Evelyn's office came 2 days later. A young couple, both teachers, with a toddler and a mortgage they couldn't afford if they refinance, fell through. We want to do option 1, the husband said. The ground lease. Just want this over. Evelyn walked them through the terms, answered their questions, and scheduled a signing. He came in 3 days later, signed the lease, and walked out with a recorded document showing they had clear, insurable rights to live on the property for 99 years. Their title company called the next day to say the list pendants was lifted from their specific parcel and the refinance could proceed. Word spread fast. 2 more families called that week, and 5. Then 10. By mid-December, 23 homeowners had signed ground leases. By early January, 40-1, each time someone signed, Evelyn recorded the lease with the county. Cross-referenced to the parcel, showing that I'd not the HOA, not some dissolved developer, was the landowner and lessor, and each time the balance of power shifted a little more. 3 homeowners chose option 2. They were older, tired of the fight and ready to cash out. I had their homes appraised by an independent firm, applied the 25% title defect discount, and made offers. The first was a retired couple whose house appraised at $420,000. I offered $315,000 for the structure, plus a leaseback agreement at $1,800 a month for 30 years below market rent for a house that size. They accepted. We closed in 3 weeks. They stayed in the house, now as tenants, with no mortgage, no property tax burden, and the security of a long-term lease. The second was a single father. His ex-wife was demanding he buy her out of the house as part of their divorce settlement. He couldn't refinance because of the title cloud, and he couldn't sell. My offer gave him liquidity. He took it, paid off his ex, and signed a lease to stay in the home until his kids graduated high school. The third was a widow who just wanted out. She took the cash, moved to a smaller place near her daughter, and walked away from the whole mess. Each sale was recorded. Each one showed me as the legal owner of the structure and the land beneath it by late January. I held title or leasehold interest on 64 properties in Ridgecrest Estates. That was just over 20% of the neighborhood, and it was enough. Evelyn pulled up the HOA's governing documents, the CC&RS, bylaws, and articles of incorporation. She highlighted a section I hadn't paid attention to before. Voting rights. Each lot owner holds 1 vote. In matters requiring membership approval, voting is weighted by recorded ownership or leasehold interest in community parcels. You're a lot owner now, Evelyn said. 64 times over. And under the HOA's own rules, you hold 64 votes in any membership decision. Can I vote out the board? I asked. You can call a special meeting and propose a vote of no confidence. If you get a simple majority, they're gone. I thought about Marcus standing at the front of the clubhouse, telling people to fight, to resist, to stand together while one by one, families quietly called Evelyn and signed deals because they needed to move forward with their lives. Do it, I said. Call the meeting. Let's see if they still want to fight when their own rules say I control 1/5 of the votes. The notice of special meeting went out in early February, delivered to every homeowner and posted at the clubhouse as required by the bylaws. Special membership. Meeting Ridgecrest Estates, HOA date. February 20th, 2026. Purpose. Vote of no confidence. Current board of directors proposed by my name. As holder of recorded leasehold ownership interests in 64 parcels, Marcus tried to block it, claiming I wasn't a legitimate member, but the bylaws were clear. Anyone holding recorded interest in a parcel had voting rights. Evelyn sent a letter citing chapter and verse. The county confirmed the meeting was legally called. The vote was scheduled, and in the 2 weeks leading up to it, 10 more families signed ground leases. Not because I pressured them, not because I threatened them, but because they saw what was happening. They saw their neighbors getting clear title, refinancing, selling, moving on, and they realized that fighting was just going to leave them stuck while everyone else moved forward. By the time the meeting arrived, I held interests in 74 properties, nearly a quarter of the neighborhood, and Marcus Delacroix Hood once stood at the head of the HOA table and dismissed me as a vulture heir, was about to learn what happens when the person you're fighting owns the ground you're standing on, because I wasn't just the heir to 1,500 acres. Anymore, I was the largest stakeholder in Ridgecrest Estates, and I was done playing by their rules. The special meeting was held on a cold Thursday night in February. The clubhouse was packed, standing room only, tension so thick you could feel it in the air. I arrived with Evelyn, carrying nothing but a folder with the recorded leases and the HOA bylaws. Marcus was already at the front table, flanked by Craig Whitmore and the remaining board members. He looked thinner than he had in December, his confident veneer replaced with something that looked like exhaustion and anger held together by sheer stubbornness. The meeting was called to order at 7 p.m. sharp. Marcus stood and addressed the room. This meeting was forced by someone who's trying to hijack our community, he said. He's bought influence by coercing vulnerable homeowners into signing away their rights. Tonight we have a chance to stop him, to vote down this sham and reaffirm our commitment to fighting for what's ours. Diane Porter, sitting in the second row, raised her hand. Point of order. Under the bylaws, any member holding recorded interest in community parcels has the right to call a meeting and propose a vote. He followed the rules. Let's get on with it. Marcus glared at her, but nodded to the secretary, who read the resolution. Aloud, Resolution 202-602, vote of no confidence in current board of directors, whereas the current board has failed to resolve the title dispute affecting this community, and whereas their decisions have resulted in financial harm to homeowners, the membership hereby calls for the immediate removal of all sitting directors and the election of an interim board to negotiate a resolution. All in favor? The secretary asked. Hands went up across the room. I raised mine once for each of the 74 properties I held interest in. Evelyn had prepared proxy cards, signed by each leaseholder, authorizing me to vote on their behalf. It was all legal, all by the book, all according to the HOA's own rules. The secretary counted. 143 votes in favor. Opposed? Fewer hands. The count came back at 91. The resolution passes, the secretary said quietly. Marcus stood frozen for a moment, his face pale. Then he grabbed his briefcase and walked out without a word. 2 board members followed him. The other 2 stayed seated, looking shell-shocked. Diane stood. Nominate myself for interim board president, with a mandate to negotiate a settlement and restore stability to this community. Someone seconded. The vote was unanimous. Within 10 minutes, Ridgecrest Estates had a new board, and within 2 weeks, that board was sitting across from Evelyn and me, ready to talk. The settlement negotiations took a month, but they were surprisingly straightforward. Once Marcus was gone, Diane and the new board acknowledged what the old board had refused to admit. The HOA had no legal claim to the land. They'd been living on borrowed time, under a lease that had expired and documents that were either fraudulent or void. The new board agreed to admit in writing that the HOA never held fee simple title to any land within Ridgecrest Estates, surrender any claims to common areas, amenities, or infrastructure. All of it clubhouse, pool, trails, street swaths on my land. And I now held the rights, assign any potential claims against the original developer, prior board members, or title insurers. To me, if there was money to be recovered, I'd pursue it. Encourage all remaining homeowners to accept one of the settlement options within 60 days. In exchange, I agreed to grant the HOA a revocable license to continue operating the clubhouse and amenities for 1 year. Giving residents time to transition, offer extended settlement. Terms to holdouts 90 days instead of 30 with no penalties for late acceptance. Not pursue eviction actions against anyone who was negotiating in good faith. The agreement was signed in mid-March and recorded with the county. The criminal and civil cases moved in parallel. Laura Chen, the deputy attorney general, secured plea agreements from 2 former board members and the developer's old attorney. All 3 admitted they'd known the lease was expiring, that fee simple title had never transferred, and that they'd deliberately obscured that fact from buyers. The developer's attorney, in his plea allocution, stated, "We believed that if we continued development and the Talmadge family didn't object, we could eventually claim ownership through adverse possession or negotiate a buyout. It was a calculated risk. We were wrong." Those admissions were filed as public record and sent to every title insurance company that had issued policies in Ridgecrest. 3 insurers settled with me directly, paying a combined $1.8 million in exchange for releasing claims related to their negligent title searches. The money went toward legal fees, survey costs, setting up a fund to help homeowners transition to the new leasing structure. The quiet title action went to court in April. Judge Raymond Kellerman. Nonsense. Jurist in his 60s heard arguments over 2 days and issued his ruling from the bench. "This case is not complicated," he said, looking over his reading glasses at Craig Whitmore, who was still representing the handful of holdout homeowners. "The plaintiff has presented a clear, unbroken chain of title going back to 1948. The defendants have presented ... wishes. They wish they owned the land. They wish the developer had bought it. They wish the lease had been renewed. But wishing doesn't create ownership. He signed the order that afternoon. Or death, declaratory judgment, in quiet title, the court declares that my name, as heir to the Talmadge estate, holds sole simple title to approximately 1,487 acres, legally described as full description, including all land within the boundaries of the Ridgecrest Estates. Subdivision, the corrected subdivision plats filed by Summit Ridge Development LLC are void as to any purported transfer of ownership. Plats subdivide land. They do not convey it. The 1998 ground lease between Arthur Talmadge and Ridgecrest Land Holdings LLC expired by its own terms in June 2023 and reverted to the lessor upon cessation of payments in 2009. Defendants' claims of ownership via adverse possession, color of title, or equitable estoppel are denied. Defendants occupied the land under a lease with permission, which defeats adverse possession. The lease's expiration returned all rights to the landowner. All land designated as HOA common property, including the clubhouse, pool, recreational facilities, and streets, is owned by plaintiff. The HOA holds no ownership interest in any real property. The HOA is hereby recognized solely as a voluntary homeowners association with authority over covenants and maintenance. But with no land ownership rights, homeowners residing on the property hold possessory interests only to the extent granted by plaintiff through lease or other recorded agreement. Absent such agreement, their occupation is at sufferance and subject to plaintiff's rights as landowner. The judge's final statement was pointed. This subdivision was built on land that was never properly acquired. The developer gambled that the landowner wouldn't notice or wouldn't care. They lost that gamble. Now the rightful owner has appeared. The consequences are exactly what property law prescribes. The dam broke after the court order. Holdouts, who'd been clinging to Marcus's promise of victory, suddenly had a signed judicial decree telling them they owned nothing. Their attorneys advised them to settle. Their families begged them to settle. And one by one, they called Evelyn by the end of May. 148 homeowners had signed ground leases. 19 had chosen structure. Buyouts and lease dashbacks. 8 had taken the moving assistance and vacated. That left 137 families still undecided or in negotiation, but the tide had turned. The HOA's legal defense fund was empty. Craig Whitmore had quietly withdrawn from representing the holdouts. And Marcus Delacroix had moved out of state. By August, the number of signed agreements was over 220, and in September, the membership held a final vote. Whether to dissolve the Ridgecrest Estates HOA entirely and replace it with a voluntary neighborhood association, the vote was 201 in favor, 14 against. The HOA, as a legal entity with covenants and enforcement power, ceased to exist in its place. Diane formed the Ridgecrest Neighbors Group, a simple, voluntary organization, focused on communication, social events, and coordinating. Maintenance of shared amenities, which I leased back to them at nominal cost. No mandatory fees. No architectural review. No power to fine or foreclose, just neighbors helping neighbors. I stood on a ridge at the eastern edge of the property on a clear October morning, looking out over the land that had been in my family since 1948. The valleys rolled out below me, covered in timber and meadow, creeks cutting through the low points, and in the center of it, Ridgecrest Estates, 312 homes, streets and sidewalks, a clubhouse and pool, walking trails that wound through the hills, all of it sitting on land that, according to every recorded document in Cascade County, belonged to me. I pulled up the county's GIS map on my phone, zooming in on the parcels. Each one now showed a leasehold interest or ownership note with my name attached. The land itself, the dirt, the title, the simple ownership, was a single entry owner, a name, parcel size. 1,487 acres encumbrances, 148 ground leases, 19. Structure ownership's various recorded easement side never wanted this. Never imagined inheriting a neighborhood, managing leases, or becoming a landlord to 300 families. But when someone builds a kingdom on land they don't own, and the real owner shows up, This is what happens, not because of cruelty, because of greed, just because of a deed, a chain of title, and the slow, relentless gravity of property law. Marcus had called me a vulture. The HOA had called me a fraud, but the judge had called me the owner. And now, standing on the ridge my grandfather had once walked, looking out over land he'd bought, for almost nothing 75 years ago, I understood something simple. You can build houses. You can pave streets. You can plant trees and create communities and lives. But if you do it on land you don't own, you're just renting time. And when the owner comes to collect all the signatures, all the title insurance, all the years of confidence don't mean a thing. Because, in the end, property law doesn't care about what you thought you owned. It cares about what the deed says. And my name was on the deed. All 1,487 acres of it. Every house. Every street. Every square foot mine. Not because I took it, because it had. Always been mine. And now, finally, everyone knew it. The new signs went up in November. Simple, professional, no flourish or hostility, just truth stamped on aluminum and bolted 2 posts at every entrance and trailhead. Private property, Talmadge. Land access by written permission only inquiries. Contact email the old signsy. Ones that had claimed private HOA property and residents only were taken down and stacked in a storage unit. I didn't throw them away. They were evidence, in a way. How thoroughly people had believed a lie simply because it was printed on a sign and planted in the ground. But the lie was over now. The subdivision remained. The homes, the streets, the carefully planned cul-de-sacs, they were all still there. But the fiction that had sustained them, the invisible framework of assumed ownership, had collapsed. Now, everything ran on paper. Real paper. Recorded documents. Leases with my name as lessor. Deeds with my name as landowner. No more phantom entities. No more we've always done it this way. No more handshake understandings that somehow morphed into claims of ownership. Just clarity. And for the people who lived there, that clarity, however uncomfortable, was better than the chaos that had come before. The ground leases were simple, and I kept them that way on purpose. No hidden clauses, no escalation tricks, no traps. The terms were clear. 99-year lease term, renewable by mutual agreement. Monthly rent starting at $400. Escalating 3% annually, roughly tracking inflation. Leaseholder responsible for all improvements, taxes on the structure, and maintenance. I retained ownership of the land and any improvements at lease termination. Leases were transferable with sale of the home, so long as the buyer accepted the terms. For the families who'd bought their structures outright and leased them back, the terms were even simpler. Fixed monthly rent for 30 years. Below market rates, with an option to purchase the structure back at the end if they wanted. It wasn't generous. It wasn't a gift. But it was fair. And it was honest. And after a year of title chaos, collapsing sales, and legal warfare, fair and honest was more than most of them had expected. The common area's clubhouse, pool, tennis courts, walking trails, became the subject of a separate agreement. I didn't want to manage a country club, and the residents didn't want to lose access to the amenities they'd paid HOA dues to maintain for years, so we worked it out. I leased the amenities back to the Ridgecrest Neighbors Group, Diane's voluntary association, for $1 per year. With the group responsible for all maintenance, insurance, and liability, membership in the group was optional. Residents who wanted access paid a modest annual fee, $600 a year, that went into a maintenance fund. Those who didn't want access didn't pay and didn't use the facilities. No mandatory fees, no liens. No foreclosures over unpaid dues. Just a simple arrangement. If you want it, you fund it. If you don't, you opt out. Diane managed it with a small elected committee, no paid staff. No management company, no bloated bureaucracy. They met once a quarter, posted meeting notes online, and kept a transparent budget that anyone could review. It worked. Not because it was perfect, but because it was small, voluntary, and grounded in reality. The rules I set for the land were equally straightforward, and I put them in writing so there'd be no confusion. Land use and access. Talmadge property. Ridgecrest subdivision leased parcels. Leaseholders have exclusive use of their lease lot for residential purposes. No commercial use without written approval. Common paths and trails. Residents may use designated walking trails and access roads. These are revocable licenses, not permanent easements. Abuse or damage results in access termination, utilities and infrastructure. Existing utility easements, water, sewer, electric, are recognized and recorded. Any new utility work requires written permission and proper easement agreements. No. Assumed it was okay installations, no encroachments. Do not build, plant, or place anything on land outside your leased parcel without written permission. Encroachments will be removed at owner's expense. Zero tolerance for false claims. Any attempt to file documents claiming ownership, easements, or rights not granted in writing will be treated as fraud and referred to authorities. I posted the rules on a simple website and sent copies to every leaseholder. No legalese, no ambiguity. Just clear boundaries and clear consequences. Most people followed them without issue. Few pushed, testing to see if I was serious. One couple started building a shed that extended 2 feet onto land outside. Their lease boundary. I sent a polite letter with a survey showing the encroachment. They moved the shed. A man tried to claim an implied easement to run a driveway across a corner of my unleased land to reach his back lot. I denied it in writing and offered to lease him the strip for $50 a month if he wanted documented access. He declined and used his front driveway like everyone else, a pair of homeowners asked. If they could use a section of the old logging road as a shortcut to a hiking trail on public land. I said yes. Granted them a written license and recorded it. When they asked why I bothered recording something so small, I said, because 20 years from now, I don't want your kids claiming they own it because their parents always used it. They understood Diane and I met occasionally, sometimes at a coffee shop in town, sometimes walking the trails that wound through the property. She'd taken on the impossible job of leading a community through a transition nobody had wanted. She'd done it with patience and pragmatism. How's it going? I asked one afternoon as we walked a ridge trail overlooking the valley. Better than I expected, she said. People are settling in. The ones who signed leases have stable housing and clear title. The ones who bought out have. Liquidity and certainty. A few are still bitter, but most have moved on. And Marcus? She shook her head. Gone. Moved to Arizona, I heard. I don't think he'll ever admit he was wrong, but at least he's not here stirring people up. We walked in silence for a while. The only sound the crunch of gravel under our boots and the wind moving through the pines. You know, it's strange, Diane said. This place feels more stable now than it did when the HOA was running it. People know where they stand. They know what they own and what they don't. There's no pretending anymore. That's what happens when you build on truth instead of lies, I said. Yeah, she smiled faintly. But it's also what happens when someone shows up with a deed and doesn't blink. I stood on the same ridge one evening in late December, watching the sun set over the property. The air was cold, the sky streaked with orange and pink, and the subdivision below glowed with the warm lights of homes where families were making dinner, helping kids with homework, living the ordinary rhythms of life. None of them had wanted this outcome. Most had believed truly and completely that they owned their homes and the land beneath them. That belief had been shattered and the rebuilding had been painful, but they were still here, still living, still working, still raising families. On land that's in paper belonged to me, but in reality, we shared under terms that were clear, honest, and recorded. I'd never set out to own a neighborhood. I'd inherited land 1,487 acres of timber and meadow that my grandfather had bought for almost nothing 75 years ago. I'd expected to sell it, maybe, or just hold on to it and pay the taxes like my uncle had. Instead, I'd found an entire community built on a foundation of fake paperwork and expired leases, managed by people who'd gambled that the real owner would never show up. They lost that gamble, and when they refused to admit it, when they called me a vulture and a thief and rallied the community to fight, I stopped playing nice. Not because I wanted to hurt anyone, because letting them continue the lie would have hurt me, and hurt every family who needed to refinance, to sell, to move on with their lives. So I brought the truth in the form of deeds and surveys and court orders. And I let property loss, low, boring, relentless property, low, do what it does best. Protect the person who actually owns the land. Marcus had built his authority on confidence and bluster, on signs and emails and the collective belief that if enough people agreed on something, it became true. But property law doesn't work that way. It doesn't care how long you've lived somewhere. It doesn't care how much you've invested. It doesn't care about your feelings, your family, your good faith belief that you own something. It cares about the deed. And my name was on the deed. The moral isn't complicated, though people always want it to be. When you build power, or a house, or a community in land you don't really own, it only looks solid until someone shows up with the real deed. You can file plats, you can sell lots, you can issue title insurance and record documents, and plant signs claiming private property. But if the foundation is a lie, if the chain of title is broken, if the land was never yours to begin with, then everything built on top of it is just borrowed time. And when the real owner shows up, all the emails, all the HOA votes, all the years of confidence won't save you. Because property law is gravity, it's dull, it's relentless. It doesn't negotiate. It just is. Marcus thought he could outlast me, thought his legal team and his HOA's resources would wear me down. He was wrong, because I didn't need to outlast him. I just needed to hold the deed and wait for the law to do its work. And it did. The land is still here. The homes are still here. The families are still here, but now, if everyone knows who owns the dirt, and they know that if you build your kingdom on someone else's acreage, you'd better hope the real owner never decides to stop playing nice. Because when they do, your kingdom doesn't crumble, it just gets a new landlord and the rent is due. I turned and walked back down the trail, the lights of Ridgecrest Estates glowing in the valley below. 300 families living on land that had been mine all along, and would be mine long after they were gone. Not because I took it, but because I kept it. The way my grandfather had, the way my uncle had, the way property law said. I could one deed, one chain of title, one truth, and that was enough.